pursue the study of God's Word becomes corrupt. I greatly fear that the schools, unless they teach the Holy Scriptures diligently and impress them on the young students, are wide gates to hell.
For centuries, American education included religious and moral principles within student instruction, and there is no question of the academic success of that philosophy. However, there have been great changes in recent years, efforts to completely secularize public education. The results have not been good. In fact, to verify the weakness of the current approach, simply look at the present condition of education. Since the court ordered a completely secular approach to public education in 1962, educational scores have plummeted, evidenced by the dramatic decline in college-bound student SAT scores. Furthermore, in recent international academic competitions, American high school students have regularly finished last, near the last, or in the bottom half of students in both math and science testing. In fact, in a recent international testing, although American elementary students performed above average and junior high students performed at average, American high school students finished at the bottom, thus prompting one critic to remark, "The longer U.S. students stay in school, the less they seem to know." Additionally, illiteracy has skyrocketed in America, evidenced by the fact that America now ranks a dismal 65th in the world in literacy among 200 nations, and a number of third world nations currently post higher literacy rates than the United States, whereas only a few decades ago, we had been the best. Illiteracy is so rampant that among recent high school graduates, 700,000 of them, after 12 years of public school, were unable to read their own diplomas. These are not the educational results that Americans had experienced under the former philosophy of education. In fact, it is the current decline and failure in the quality of public education, as evidenced through numerous measurements, that has produced a rapid rise in the popularity of and support for school choice. In fact, almost 24 states have now passed some form of educational choice in order to give students a way to escape failing educational systems. The educational achievements of earlier generations stand in stark contrast to those of today, and numerous American students in those early years routinely achieved at an early age what today we consider extraordinary. For example, Declaration signer Charles Carroll entered college at the age of 10. Fisher Ames entered Harvard when he was 12 years old. And Benjamin Rush graduated from Princeton when he was only 14. And John Trumbull, a law student under John Adams and a justice on the Supreme Court of Connecticut, had already read through the Bible for the first time when he was 4 years old. When he was 6, he won a Greek contest against his local minister. And when he was 7.5 years old, he passed the entrance exam to Yale University. But his parents decided to hold him out until he was 13 so that he could attend college with his peers. There are many similar examples. And while entering a university at 13 or 14 seems a young age to us today, it was not then. And the academics were harder then than they are now. Consider some other examples. Andrew Jackson, who later became a U.S. president, was only 12 years old when, as a soldier in the American Revolution, he was captured and made a prisoner of war by the British. And when John Quincy Adams was 8 years old, he performed musket drills during the Revolution with the famous Massachusetts Minutemen. When he was 14, he received a congressional diplomatic appointment overseas as secretary to the ambassador at the court of Catherine the Great in Russia. And when Constitution signer William Livingston was 14, he moved in among the Mohawk Indians to live as a missionary. And James Iredell, a justice placed on the Supreme Court by George Washington, was appointed to public office in North Carolina to oversee financial matters when he was 17 years old. This is almost unimaginable today, but such accounts simply were not that unusual under the American educational system at that time. If you believe that these types of examples represent only exceptions rather than the rule, then remember the 4th grade geography test in Chicago from 1862? How many 4th grade students today, or even adults for that matter, could pass that test? Or the elementary math test from 1877? Or the history test from 1882? Or for that matter, simply surf the web for 8th grade exit tests used in most states around 1890, and then have students or citizens from any age group today to try taking those tests. And remember Webster's blueback speller? Look at some of the spelling words that were taught in elementary schools for 150 years. Contumelious, ichthyology, bronchotomy, loquacious, mendacity, amigurous, vertiginous, oleaginous, acanthus, and there are many other words in this elementary spelling book that most of us today have probably never seen. The American system of education long benefited from the scriptural promise of Proverbs 1:7 that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. It would not have surprised Dr. Benjamin Rush to learn that our academic achievements have fallen significantly since the secularization of public education. For he had long ago observed,
there is the most knowledge in those countries where there is the most Christianity. And those parents or schoolmasters who neglect the religious instruction of their children and pupils reject and neglect the most effectual means of promoting knowledge in our country.
the successful philosophy of education that characterized America for centuries has undergone a revolution in recent years. A revolution not by citizen action or legislative interference, but rather by judicial activism, with courts and judges suddenly prohibiting what had been permissible for centuries. Secularization of education is the new order of the day, but recent decades clearly demonstrate that the more secular our public schools become, the less successful they are academically. Unfortunately, too many today are unaware of the massive and dramatic changes that have recently occurred in American education, and too many others are simply complacent. Yet it is important that every citizen today, whether they have students in school or not, be concerned about the condition of education. As educator Noah Webster warned long ago,
the education of youth should be watched with the most scrupulous attention. It is much easier to introduce and establish an effectual system than to correct by penal statutes the ill effects of a bad system. The education of youth lays the foundations on which both law and gospel rest for success.
Every citizen should exert the time and effort necessary to ensure that schools are teaching sound content and providing a good education, and that those who teach in the classrooms, as well as those elected to school boards and legislatures, are individuals who respect, honor, and embrace the time-tested principles of a sound education. And if the leaders in schools you work with will not do so, then replace the leaders or start new schools. Remember, imparting mere academic knowledge should never be a sufficient final objective for learning, nor should the secularization of education ever become acceptable. A sound education should instill the three elements long proven to be the basis of a successful education, the three elements of religion, morality, and knowledge. These elements should be instilled in our schools, but they should also be instilled at home, at church, and throughout our communities. For 4 centuries in American education, religion, morality, and knowledge form the basis of character and achievement. Experience and common sense demonstrate that these elements are still the foundation that will enable today's students to be the solid citizens and the great leaders of the future. It is our responsibility as citizens not only to protect the proven educational philosophy that has made and has kept America great, but also to do everything that we can to transmit that successful educational philosophy to future generations, just as our forebears did throughout the first 4 centuries of American education.
Through Wall Builders, you'll experience more of America's forgotten history and heroes. You'll discover again our great moral, religious, and constitutional heritage through award-winning DVDs, tapes, CDs, books, and other exciting materials. America's Godly Heritage, Wall Builders' premier video, clearly shows us the beliefs and ideals that once guided our nation's founders. Those ideals have now all too often disappeared. And in America's Godly Heritage, David Barton documents the tragic results. This compelling video is galvanizing support across the country from Americans who want to see this nation return to its sacred roots. Setting the Record Straight reintroduces this generation to the forgotten heroes and untold stories from our rich African-American political history. There's Joseph Hayne Rainey, the first African-American elected to the U.S. Congress. Reverend Frederick Douglass, first African-American appointed to office in 4 presidential administrations. Reverend Hiram Rhodes Revels, the first black U.S. senator, and many others. Filled with exciting reenactments and dramatic events, Setting the Record Straight is an inspiring look at the values and courageous contributions of African American leaders to our nation's heritage. The powerful video